Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth, along with Stuart Hack. Glad to have you back, Stuart Hack.
Glad to be back, Scott. Glad to be back. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. And we want to welcome Jody McDonald to the big show. Jody, thanks for being with us tonight.
Guys, it is my pleasure, even though we're dealing with one of the wackiest baseball seasons I've ever seen and watching a game for sneaking up on 50 years now. It's just good to have baseball to talk about, is it not?
Absolutely. We'll call it Understatement 101. Go ahead, Stu.
Yeah, and Jody is talk radio royalty. So the first ever sports radio station was WFAN, and they got their start in 1987. And Jody was part of their first lineup of hosts. So we really have royalty coming on today. And Jody, I want to ask you first, how has all of this affected all the shows that you do from when it started in March?
Well, most of the shows I've been doing, the baseball-specific shows that I've done for years, and I'm still on the roster, although they haven't called me in the pitch in a while. Sirius XM's MLB Network Radio. They're all the same in that there were no sports to be talked about. I'm a horse racing fan, and they were able to keep racing in certain markets, so it gave me at least one live sport to talk about, but not that many people are horse racing fans like myself. So you have to talk about the things about it and how they're handling the fact that they're shutting it down. They're negotiating to bring it back. Then they started to bring it back, first with baseball and then the NBA and the NHL. So it had to be a little bit more creative to be able to fill 4 hours of airtime on a given night. But people, for some reason, stuck with sports. And the stations that I work at that have ratings actually did quite well. The number of people listening to the radio overall was down, but the percentages that were listening to the stations that I work for stayed pretty high, if not higher than usual. So we were able to fight our way through the downtime, but now we're just into the kind of weird time and the different time and the how do we actually get these seasons done time, and we're somehow trying to pull it off.
You know, Jody, I got to tell you this. Many years ago, I did the sports exchange up in the metropolitan Detroit area, and you know what I had to do? Week in and week out, I had to go ahead and fill a 6-hour radio show back. Think about this, back in the 80s. 6 hours of, and I'll tell you, what we did to get content and copy is just unreal. Whether it's, I don't know whether it's talking about trainers or prearranged things, but you name it, fill in 6 hours. Tell the audience what it's like. One thing to fill 4 hours, but trying to do 6 on a given night. What do you have to put into something like that?
I haven't done 6 in a long time. Stu mentioned when I got my start back in the 80s.
Right.
For WFAN, and I was their original weekend overnight host. I was a young, snot-nosed kid who knew certainly quite about Major League Baseball with the fact that my father was in it, but the rest of the stuff was just because I was a diehard sports fan, and I used to be on from midnight to 6 a.m. So I do know what it's like to try and fill a 6-hour show, but thankfully I haven't done that since late 80s, early 90s. Every once in a while, you get a game ends early. You get a 4 or 5 hour shift, and a game will end up more quicker than it is if you're coming on a night after the game. So I've done 5 and or 5 plus, but it's been a while since 6, and I tip my hat to you if you did it week in and week out.
Oh, I did. I'll tell you what the challenges that we had. Hey, listen, we had to rely on the AP, the UPI. We had to worry about all the tickers, you name it, to get our information. We didn't have that thing called the internet. We didn't have that thing called, Wikipedia or anything. We had to do everything we could to scrape what we can do. But we enjoyed doing it. You know, there's nothing like a challenge of putting together a broadcast. So, but back then the tools were far different. They definitely were. The wire services, you name it. But if that's what it took to put 6 hours together, we had, remember the old, those things that look like 8-track tapes that you have to stick in there? You know what I'm talking about? Those cart feeds?
Yep, the carts. I remember those.
Carts. You got to have your carts ready to play those commercials, because the commercials were your best friend. That kept you from keeping your voice over a 6-hour show.
No kidding. Oh, yeah. Oh, I can't wait to meet you if you ever get down here. We can talk about some real horror stories and I mean, fun horror stories. This isn't Friday the 13th, although I should say it's probably Thursday the 13th. Just teasing you. But whatever.
I remember, at WCDB in Albany, the college radio station where I met Jody, walking to the AP machine uphill both ways in the snow, just to get the latest scores.
That's all you had. You had your little AP machine that spit out the scores for you. And again, we now have it so easy. I'm glad that I work with a bunch of guys that remember when it was a little bit harder back in the day.
Yeah. So now, Jody, baseball season has started. You think they're going to finish?
It all comes down to the Cardinals at this point, doesn't it? As I have another outbreak next week, and it'll be a whole other story, but they can't get on the field. Joe Girardi did a spot that I was listening to on Sirius XM MLB Network a couple of weeks ago. It was, maybe 10 days ago, might not be 2 full weeks, but he certainly mentioned the fact that there's a good chance that not all 30 teams are going to play 60 games. That there are going to be teams, because of outbreaks, that have to miss series, if not a week, if not more than a week. And that, they're going to play in the 50s. And at the end of the season, they're going to decide who the 16 teams that are going to make the expanded playoffs. They're going to do so by winning percentage rather than number of wins, because they're just not going to be able to schedule as many makeup games as they're going to need to be made up. So everyone is going to have to accept that and go with that. But the Cardinals are falling so far behind. What is the legitimate number? If you can't play 60, okay, is it 55? Is it 50? Is it 45? Can you actually give a team a playoff spot who only plays 40 games when everybody else is expected to play 60? I just don't know that that's fair. So what's the other option? Do you just eliminate the Cardinals and say, guys, guess what? You don't have to play. Well, that's good for the other 29 teams, but I don't know if the Cardinals would accept that. I don't know if the Cardinals would be able to. I'm sure they'd be able to pay all their players, but you'd ask them to take a larger loss than anybody in this season where franchises are losing money left and right. That's the whole crux of it right now. They have had a couple of teams fall behind in games played. Marlins kind of stiffed themselves, and the Phillies and the Yankees and the Orioles in that first week when they came out in the first weekend with half of the team testing positive for COVID-19. But other than that, they've been able to continue to play these games and field teams. You've had some positive tests, but they've been able to dip down into their go rosters in their minor league towns and fill out their positions needed. So it all comes down to the Cardinals, and I honestly don't know how Major League Baseball is going to handle that.
Well, it's amazing, Jody. I've been following the Miami Marlins situation, and to go ahead and see a Zoom call with not only Don Mattingly, but then Derek Jeter came on, and now you see the St. Louis Cardinals, and they were actually supposed to play a doubleheader with the Detroit Tigers. They lost a 4-game series. Tonight was a doubleheader makeup, not the case. So, I guess we realize that those are the two that have gotten out of control. And yet the Marlins seem to always be ridiculed because of their lack of success.
Well, they went first. I think they're ridiculed more than anything else because they did it first.
Right.
If it had been the other side around, if the Cardinals had, after 3 days of play, had half the team test positive, I think they'd be getting the same exact grief. I think it's just the fact that the Marlins went first. And hey, to their credit, they have played well. They're an above 500 team. They are playing with guys who weren't on their original 30-man roster, a goodly number, specifically some of the pitchers. So I'll give the Marlins credit for actually having put together a team that was maybe better than other people thought. But again, what they did at the beginning and the guys not taking it seriously enough and passing it on to their teammates and the like, they should get some grief for that.
Well, they're piling up players on the waiver wire trades. Any way that you can scrap together a credible team, they found a way to do it. I know we'll probably talk about awards a little bit later, but I would think that Don Mattingly would be a strong candidate for Manager of the Year, and he would really earn it considering what Don Mattingly's had to deal with so far.
There's one thing I'll say about Mattingly, and I'm a huge Mattingly fan. I liked him. I didn't think he should have been fired from the Dodgers when he was. Dave Roberts has done a nice job coming in there and taking over, but I thought Mattingly should have been able to keep the job in L.A. The one mistake he made, and I know the details on this because they did it here in Philadelphia, he had several positive tests on his team that the team knew about, and he called his players ahead of time or texted his players ahead of time and said, we're going to have to reach out to Major League Baseball at some point and tell them of these positive tests. The guys who have tested positive have already gone into isolation. But do we want to play this third and final game on a Sunday against the Phillies? He had a team text out there on Saturday night, and the remaining guys who hadn't tested positive yet, may have just been asymptomatic, but hadn't tested positive, said, yeah, we want to finish off the series. They did. The next day, eight more guys test positive. And Mattingly shouldn't have allowed his players to make that call. The call should have come from Major League Baseball. He should have gone, the information should have gone immediately to the Major League Baseball offices in Manhattan, and then they should have decided whether 4 positive tests of players was enough to, in a precautionary move, shut down that final Sunday game. Now, it didn't affect any of the Phillies. The Phillies over the next week only had 2 people test positive. One was a coach, one was a strength and conditioning guy. None of the players who were on the field with the Marlins who could have gotten it from them did, but I still don't think that should have been the case, and there may have been more Marlin guys that passed them amongst themselves on that Sunday afternoon and then caused the number to be as big as it was on Monday testing. And now, if you're just talking about making the right moves on the field and pushing the right buttons and calling up the right guys and put them in the right place, you're right. I think Mattingly is the NL manager of the year. But he did make one grievous error in doing something none of us really have ever dealt with before. So while I think he made a mistake, it isn't a mistake that he should have to pay too big a price for.
Well, that's true. But when you think about the Miami Marlins, they had they were supposed to be on the road 6 days, and as it turns out, they were on the road for 23 days, and now they'll finally see their home stadium tomorrow. That's just surreal. Go ahead, Stu.
So you had mentioned like players, like a couple of Cleveland pitchers who kind of took off on their own. Now, at this point, Mattingly's not going to get reprimanded because basically they were first. But now going forward, will Major League Baseball take a more careful look at how players and coaches handle things and possibly, put fines and suspensions down?
That's a great question, Stu. I thought they were going to take some action against the Marlins. Here's the strange thing about it. Major League Baseball likes to investigate. They investigated the Astros cheating scandal almost to death, and the players ended up all getting passes, and the general manager and the manager lost their job over it, but the investigation took forever. Shoot, the Red Sox cheated the year before, and no action was taken against them until after the Astros scandal kind of pushed it into the spotlight. So Major League Baseball takes its investigating seriously and slowly. Well, sometimes you got to be able to investigate fast, and you got to be able to get people to talk to people within a 24, 48, maybe 72-hour period. Gather as much information as you can, and then make the biggest and best decision that you can on that information. They don't seem capable of doing the kind of investigating that needs to be done, or they believe needs to be done, and then merit out punishment. That's why none of the Marlin players were affected. So to this point, the Cleveland players are in the same exact boat. Do I think action should be taken against them? Yeah, because I think these guys just blatantly chose not to follow the protocols in place. But if you go by what the MLB has done to this point, my prediction would be drag their feet more than anything else.
So now baseball, let's assume they finish the season in some form. Teams play between 50 and 60 games, and now we have the expanded playoffs. Does baseball need at this point to go into a bubble like the NBA and NHL to ensure the season finishes?
Do they need to do it? I don't know if I would go there. You played 60 games without a bubble, so what would say you need to have a bubble for postseason?
I mean, I guess just out of safety, because what if all of a sudden there's another outbreak in the middle of the postseason?
Understood. They should do it, and they're investigating it. And if, again, you wanted to make me make a prediction, I think they're probably, if they can pull it off, I think they'll do that. Because you're right, it's just safer. It's working for the NBA, it's working for the NHL. They're not having any COVID problems, or very few, for the amount of teams that they got participating. It really is minuscule, the kind of outbreaks that they've had. So it certainly is working, and I think baseball would love to take a clue from them and do it. How it's going to work, where they're going to put it, that hasn't been decided yet. I've heard LA is probably what they would like to do, because you need both an American League and a National League bubble, and they put the NL in Dodger Stadium and the AL and down in Anaheim, and maybe use San Diego. Actually, Anaheim and San Diego are probably better overall sites, because there is a pretty good outbreak in LA right now. So Dodger Stadium might not be the best place to try and put it, but it looks like they're going to try to do that. If they can, I think they should, and I wish them success for it. But I don't know that even they will admit that they have to do it, because there is a possibility that they've got issues. It took the NHL and the NBA months in advance to get both locations set up. So it's not as easy as just snap your fingers and say, all right, well, we'll bring all the teams into this area and play all the games at these very few stadiums.
So with that said, Jody, you feel, it's one thing to talk about an MLB bubble, but I'm getting the feeling you're talking about a California bubble?
That's what I've heard. If you want to put them in towns that have two stadiums rather than have them in two separate towns, the National Hockey League went with two Canadian towns, and they put one conference on one side of the country up there and the other on the other, in Toronto and Edmonton. But at least what I've heard is they would like to have both in somewhat proximity. So you could surely use Chicago with both the White Sox and the Cubs at Wrigley and at Comiskey. You could do New York with Yankee Stadium and with Citi Field, or you go out to California and use, if you're going to use Anaheim, then you can go either way. You can go up to LA and use Dodger Stadium, or you can go down to San Diego and use the Padres Stadium. So that's what I've heard was the earliest considerations. They may change their mind and go, no, we don't need to have the two leagues play in one area. We could have American League on one side of the country and National League on the other. The only reason why I went there was because someone in the know that I know, media member whose job is to find these things out, did mention to me that the three top choices as of right now that they're looking into was New York, Chicago, and LA. And LA was in the lead because they have three options rather than two.
Well, I like the way you talk about the NHL bubble. You have one, obviously, Edmonton and Toronto, and that has been, and the NHL bubble has been fantastic. I'm actually surprised that the NBA bubble has been as good as they are. But Adam Silver did a really good job planning the whole thing out. So both of those have worked out. So now,
yep.
but let's not lose sight of the fact that when we talk about the Cardinals' amount of games, at one point they were really talking about playing 48 games too. So where is the number?
I don't know. You don't know. Stu, do you know what number the number is going to be, the minimum number that they can project and predict that a team like the Cardinals can finish out and say, all right, yes, even though that's lesser, in our eyes, that's still enough for them to be considered for the mix for a postseason playoff. I got no idea what that number is.
If they could resume by this weekend, I mean, they're going to be playing almost doubleheaders every day. I would think they'd be able to catch up somewhat, maybe not all the way, but they could probably, assuming no more outbreaks, and that's a big assumption, get to at least 50 if they could start playing this weekend.
Yeah, but that's a big F. The Cardinals are dropping games like they're dropping like flies.
I mean, I think they're hoping still that they can, but, you know, all it takes is another case or two.
Right. Now, and here's the difficult thing about it. And I haven't seen the list, most updated recent list with the Cardinals for the guys that are out and who's coming back and the like, but adding fielding a pitching staff that would be expected to be able to get the job done. Let's say in a 10-day period, you're going to expect them to play 16 games. You're going to get 3 doubleheaders into a 10-day period. How the hell are you going to field a staff of pitchers that are going to be able to cover 16 games, 7 innings? Now, 3 of them will only be 7 innings. I give you that. But the other ones are all going to be full 9, and you're going to play every day for 10 days with 3 doubleheaders jammed in there. How are you going to have a pitching staff who can cover something like that? That's just an unfair ask.
What I think they'll do, because they'll change rules in the middle of the season, because as we said, this isn't a normal season. They'll expand the rosters. They'll do it sooner. And, if the Cardinals, they'll add pitchers, whether, right now I think it's down to 28. The season started at 30 and went to 28. They'll raise it so the Cardinals can get enough pitchers to help them with this doubleheader, because at this point, no rules are set. They'll change on the fly. They've shown they can do that, because if you recall, when the season started, no one was really discussing the 7-inning doubleheaders, but once the Marlins fell behind, then they said, all right, they need doubleheaders to make up. We're going to do 7-inning doubleheaders. So I think Major League Baseball is just going to kind of do a lot of things on the fly this year. And, if the Cardinals have to make up a lot of games, they'll make sure the rosters are expanded so that they have the manpower to do it.
But here's the question I would ask you, Commissioner Hack. You're making a pretty good point, but I'm going to try and play devil's advocate here. Do you allow the Cardinals to expand the rosters? And then
I allow everybody. You allow everybody. Yep. I mean, this season already has the feel of September baseball. And by that, I mean, you see a lot of minor league pitchers. You just see guys that you normally wouldn't see. You don't see guys going deep into games. You see a lot of bullpen games. You see a lot of things that happen late in the season when teams are almost out of the race. So to expand the rosters, it would just be par for the course.
Now, I hear what you're saying, and I kind of agree with you. But I can tell you one of the things that will happen because of this is teams in the American League that have nothing to do with the Cardinals, that's the AL Central. Let's say the Yankees and the Rays. And the Yankees are up by a couple of games, and the Rays just continue to add pitchers because the commissioner has rechanged the rules to allow the Cardinals to have enough pitchers to pitch. Some of those extra pitchers Tampa are helping them, while the Yankees don't have that resource to tap into, and you'll hear complaints about, wait a minute, we're changing the rules in our league because one team is having problems in the other league. That's just not right. That's just not fair. And then the commissioner's going to have to stand up there and try and explain it. It's not going to be easy.
So, Jody, let me ask you a couple of questions. First of all, are you surprised that the Marlins have had some success knowing that they've dealt with all kinds of adversity to begin with? I mean, think about it. This team was off a long time, and they piecemealed their way to a 6-game winning streak.
Absolutely, and that's where your point you made earlier about Mattingly comes into play, and his staff, they've done a really good job, and they've gotten the most out of guys who, let's be honest, probably wouldn't be in the big leagues if we didn't have expanded rosters, if you didn't have teammates down with positive COVID tests, guys who weren't going to be in the big leagues last year, not only are in the big leagues, but doing a pretty good job coming out of that Marlin pen. So, I'm surprised. Not that Don Mattingly's done a good job, because I said earlier I'm a Mattingly fan, but how good the Marlins have played when they've been able to play has absolutely surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, so how would you define the job that Rob Manfred has done? Is there any commissioner that had to take on? It's one thing that the negotiations and the greed made him look bad, but now all of a sudden we're playing ball. How does Rob Manfred look in all of this?
If you listen to any of my shows, be it on WFAN in New York, WIP in Philly, CBS Sports Radio, or previously on Sirius XM's MLB Network Radio, I'm one of commissioners, and when I say that, that's a plural, fans out there. I think people just expect them to always get everything right, and anytime anything goes wrong, they get crushed. When they get things right, nobody even notices. They're kind of like umpires. You're supposed to get every call right, and nobody makes a big stink unless you get something wrong. And I defend Goodell. I defend Silver, and I think he's done a tremendous job since he's taken over for Stern. And for the most part, I've defended Manfred as well. I still, to this day, even I'm just about to criticize him here in a second, even with that critique, I'm going to throw his way. He's better than Bud Selig ever was. Here's where I've got an issue with Rob Manfred. Not the fact that it took him a while and they just about got a collective bargaining agreement done to get the season up and running, and the things that we've just been discussing about roster manipulation just to get the season in and trying to be fair. I think he's done as good a job as he can or anyone else could. What Rob Manfred has done a lousy job with this year is representing his product. Twice in the last 3 or 4 months, he has said something, and then within a 48-hour period had to come out and do a complete 180. When he was negotiating with the players on draft night, he said, we're going to have a season. And then they put out their latest effort, and the players went down the road. Well, you just tell us where and when, because they weren't going to sign off on an agreement. They refused, and they took a very aggressive stance against Manfred. So then he's got to come back out and say, well, we may or may not have a season. Whoa. 48 hours ago, you said we're 100% going to have a season. So he's had to backtrack and turn around his opinion in very short periods of time. That's what a commissioner gets paid for, to know what a possibility is coming up 2 days down the road and not put himself in a jackpot where he's going to have to get called on the carpet and or do a complete flip-flop. Manfred's done it twice during this offseason, and both times I had to note how bad he looked in doing so. Now, the way that it's actually played out, the way that they have been able to move the season along, they can't control the Cardinal players for the problems they had. I think overall, I would say he's done a good job, but a couple of times he is open mouth and inserted foot, which is never a good thing for a commissioner to do.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it looks like Rob Manfred has some Brett Favre qualities in him because of the amount of waffling that he's done.
Is Brett Favre still retired? I'm just double checking. Or has he come out of retirement again?
I'll tell you, I love Brett.
I think I saw him wearing a St. Louis Cardinal uniform, so we may be seeing him pretty soon.
Hey, I love Brett Favre. I'm a fan of his. I love his durability. But yeah, Rob Manfred's done a little bit of waffling for sure. And the indecisiveness certainly doesn't make him look very good. But, I don't know if any commissioner could have done well under these circumstances. We're talking about MLB and NASCAR in the same sentence only because we had to change the rules on the fly when something goes wrong. But again, unprecedented circumstances being what they are, what would you expect?
So, Jody, how big do you think the asterisk will be next to the 2020 World Series champion?
There should be one, but it shouldn't be big, because what the champion is going to have accomplished this year and stuck to protocols and done the right thing and not gone out on the road, kept their best players healthy and the like, they should be rewarded for that. They should be feted for that. They should be given credit for that. But anytime you're going to play a season, and oh, by the way, the added playoffs, you're going to have to win more playoff games than you ever did before, which is something that the champion should be proud of. But in a season that's only going to go 60 games and maybe less for some as compared to 162 into the playoffs, it can never be the same. It has to get an asterisk next to it, but not for the reasons that people will scream, oh, you're not a real champion, it's a fake champion. No, it's a different championship, and different can be denotated by an asterisk. People will be more negative about it than I would, but to try and equate it to any other season, it's just not the case. When you're playing 60 and you're used to playing 162, then something has to be put into the mix to let everybody know this is a different type of championship that the team is winning here in 2020.
Yeah, but you're saying that, but meanwhile, we've had work stoppages in the past where you haven't played the full amount of games, and there are no asterisks next to those games. So, in one sense, I get it where and then for that matter, you want to stick an asterisk next to anybody, stick it by the Houston Astros, okay? Because everybody's talked about the controversy and the unfair playing field that they had with their controversy, but you've had work stoppages where you haven't even made it to the necessary game, but there are no asterisks there, so I realize this year is a good reason to do it, but how do you justify that?
And no work stoppage season, cut it down to 1/3.
Okay.
And that's damn close to what we're playing. 54 is the 1/3 mark out of 162-game season. And there are going to be some teams that are only going to play 54, but most are going to play 60.
Right.
You're right. Work stoppage seasons have lessened overall. Not every season has been every game played, but no work stoppage season has ever cut it down as much as this pandemic season is going to end up being.
Yeah, well, I see your point there. Go ahead, Stu.
And how would you say, like, award winners, like MVP award winners, Cy Young award winners, Rookie of the Year award winners, how big of an asterisk would they get?
I would say none, because everyone else is playing the same amount of games. In a championship season, the team has to accomplish something as compared to other years. It's just a given year, so we're not going to see any massive numbers. The more interesting is MVP, Cy Young, Rookie of the Year. I don't know if you could really comeback player of the year, because that kind of denotes being able to do it over a full 162 games. That one, you're right. You got a point. It might be asterisk worthy, but and people are talking about this because you do have some guys that are putting up massive numbers, like Charlie Blackmon in Colorado.
Yeah.
What if a guy hits 400?
Right. Now,
there's no real award for that, but it's an acknowledgement, and you are looked at in a specific way. And people look at the fact that Ted Williams is the last 400 hitter in almost 7 decades. Does Ted Williams lose that status because Charlie Blackmon hits 403 in a 60-game season? Now, that's a legitimate question, and it comes down to everyone's own individual perception. To me, if someone hits 400 this year and someone asks me on one of my shows after the baseball season's over, who's the last guy to hit 400, I'm going to say Ted Williams, because I'm sorry, doing so in a shortened season is not the same accomplishment as what Williams did when he did it.
Well, there's an asterisk. So let's talk about the championship for a moment, okay? I've had this, Jody, on other broadcasts, and I'll bring it to your attention as well. If I were rooting for a team to win a championship, I would root for the New York Yankees, because championship number 28 means bury the asterisk when you've only had 28 of them. So what's it going to matter? It won't matter because the Yankees won it versus other teams that perhaps are winning their first or second championship. It's tainted. But with the Yankees, do you look the other way? Do you look the other way with the Dodgers? Well, maybe. But the Yankees are the one team of any of them, Jody, that you can bury the asterisk.
Yeah, I'm going to root for the team that I root for because of every other reason other than how is the championship going to be looked at. I don't care.
Right.
And if you're a fan of that team, get ready to fight for your right to celebrate. That will not affect who I will root for. I give my opinion on the air. I try and make it as unbiased every single time.
That's fair. All right, so with that said, what are your thoughts about... You talked about the Yankees, but what about your thoughts about Major League Baseball in Buffalo?
That's pretty cool. Even though I will give the nod to the federal government of Canada above the federal government of the United States, they protected themselves and their borders really harshly, and I think they're better for it. There goes Yu Darvish's no-hitter. He just gave up a home run. But we'll explain that in a second. They told the Blue Jays, hey, sorry, we're not going to let teams just come in here and stick around for 3 days and then get out. Not happening, not in our country. If you want to stay here, you can, but your opposition isn't coming in, so we suggest you go find somewhere else to play. They looked into a couple other alternatives, Major League parks, but then the games get crowded. You're playing every single day, and you're going to be on the field. And he decided that the structure they have up there in Buffalo is close enough, and they had to take some time and build it up to sacks to get it broadcast ready and playing there ready. But From what I hear, I've got a couple of loyal callers on my weekend show on CBS who are looking forward to going to the stadium and looking through openings in the outer areas of the stadium so you can see in. It's not going to have fans other than a couple with their dogs walking by on a night-in, night-out basis, but Buffalo's not a bad town, so they should enjoy their foray into hosting Major League games for the amount of time that they do it.
Let alone the fact that there's some stadium upgrades that they get to keep, too, when it's all said and done as well.
Exactly. And good for the Blue Jays, and that's where it should be. It should be a Blue Jay-type park. So those upgrades will do well with their players that will come to their system if and when we get minor league baseball back.
Yeah, in 1987, I actually was a finalist for the Buffalo Bison's job, but ended up, I was a top 3 finalist. I didn't get it. I ended up with the Gastonia Rangers, and that was a team that had Juan Gonzalez, Sammy Sosa, and that team lost over 90-some games. But some of the players I saw back then, it was unreal. So I guess Gastonia was the consolation prize for the Buffalo gig, but I was happy to see the Bisons get it nonetheless.
Agreed. So, Jody, so some of the players already, they've opted out mid-season. Marcus Stroman just opted out. I have to ask you about Yoenis Cespedes. Do you believe, what was your take? Do you believe he was concerned about COVID, or he was upset more of on a contract basis or playing time, and that's why he opted out?
It doesn't matter. Only Yoenis Cespedes has to go to bed tonight and know that he did or didn't stiff his teammates if he made a decision other than being worried about his health. The only one he has to answer to is he and his maker. But what was just completely unacceptable with what Cespedes did was to leave. And I was watching him at game that day, and they're touching on it in the broadcast, but they're not going into it in depth as you would expect. He just doesn't show up at the park and doesn't call his manager. He doesn't call any of his coaches. He doesn't call any of his teammates. And it's not even calling anymore. In this world that we live, all you got to do is send a text. It takes you about 90 seconds to punch out a text and say, listen, I've changed my mind. I'm worried about my health. I'm worried about my family. I'm going to opt out. I'm going home. I am sorry, you guys. Best of luck. I'll still be rooting for you, but I'm getting a cab and I'm getting out of here. 90 seconds. Shoot the text off to whoever is. I'm sure that they have a protocol. They got so many protocols available these days. I'm sure there was already one in place. If you are, for some reason, not going to be able to make it to the stadium on time and play in the game that day, here's what we expect you to do. I'm sure the Mets had that in place, and he just blew it off. He packed his bag, he got in a cab, he went to the airport, he flew home. His agent gets a hold of the general manager in the 8th inning of the game that day that the Mets are playing and says, yes, I've just heard from Yoenis. He's worried about his family, and he doesn't want it to, he's opted out. He will not be flying with the team after the game to wherever they were heading next. I think they were in Atlanta at the time, going home or whatever. He's already booked on a flight, and he's taking off this afternoon, so he's officially opting out. You can't do it that way. You can't do it. Your question was leading, and I think you're right. I think that if I'm one of his teammates, I'm a little perturbed with the way he handled himself. Not that he made the decision to opt out. Even if it was questionable, you can't know it. Only Yoenis can know it. You have to accept what he says, but you absolutely don't have to accept the way that he went about doing it. That was just completely unprofessional.
Now, I thought I had seen something that Brandon Nimmo, I guess, was asked, and he had said that the players knew going to the stadium that Cespedes had opted out. Do you think it was something management was trying to cover up or bad for doing it? Or was Nimmo, maybe he misunderstood, or what do you think happened there?
If they knew, then none of the players said, I didn't see what you saw, and if there were, and you're saying players, plural, I think that it would have gotten much more coverage. Maybe he had a guess. Maybe Yoenis had talked to him ahead of time about potentially doing it. I did not read, see, or hear that any player knew ahead of time that UNS was planning on going home. Maybe they knew that he was planning on not going to the park that day. And that leads into what you asked in your question, that he wasn't happy with his game, the way that he was being used, the amount of at-bats that he was getting. Those all could have been contributing factors, and maybe he had aired that to some of his teammates, but I had not seen then and or since any statements from any of the players who said, yeah, Yoenis told me he wasn't coming to the park that day because he was opting out. I have not seen that at all.
Cespedes wants to play next year. Does the team give him a contract?
That's a good question. Assuming, and this is a massive assumption, assuming by February or March, things are back to close to normal. Depending on whether we've gotten a better grasp on COVID and the like, it's almost an impossible question to answer because we don't know what the rules are going to be. We don't know what the rosters are going to be like. We don't know what is going to be set up. I would say that it doesn't look good for this very reason. And we've now talked about it 2 or 3 different times. Yoenis wasn't happy. What I definitely had heard was he had gone to his manager and asked on days that he wasn't playing, why he wasn't playing. He had sat a couple of games, and every time he wasn't in the lineup, he got to the manager and specifically said, why aren't you playing me today? And he didn't necessarily take the news all that well when the decision was that he wasn't going to play. The only way I sign Yoenis Cespedes next year is on a make good contract. That he's got to play X amount of games. He's got to get X amount of at-bats. He's got to be on the active roster. And Cespedes is going to blanch at that kind of a contract because he didn't like the way he was being handled this year. So if I'm a team, I know what kind of deal I want to do. If I'm Cespedes, I know what kind of deal he would want to do. And I think those things line up in opposition to each other. So I would bet against Yoenis Cespedes being on a team come next season.
Now, do you see any of the teams this year at some point bringing fans back, actual fans, not the cardboard variety?
No shot. No shot between now and October. We don't have, first of all, it's got to be across the board. You can't just say, well, right now, the positive COVID tests in pick a town, any town, Kansas City, are really not that bad. Missouri, and I don't know that Missouri is doing too well because we know the Cardinals are doing badly. But we don't know if the Cardinals got the coronavirus while they were in St. Louis or if they got it, contracted it elsewhere and then brought it back to St. Louis. So, Baltimore, but whatever town. Certainly it's not going to be L.A. or either of the Florida teams. Texas' numbers spiked. Cleveland. I don't know if Cleveland's got high volume right now or not. You can't just do it for Cleveland because that would give them a massive advantage. The only way you can bring fans back is if you bring them back across the board for all the teams and you try and balance it as close as you can to teams playing the same number of home games in season. I just don't see that as possible. We don't have a good enough grasp on COVID-19 across the country, and it's not going to dip down across the board fast enough to get games in. So I don't think there's any chance that games are played in front of fans here in 2020.
Yeah, I don't see anybody playing the right amount of home games in their home stadium because, again, you guys have talked about it anyways, all these doubleheaders scrambling where to play the games. At least we know that there is no home field advantage since there's nobody there. I mean, the only ones that the Tampa Bay Rays and Miami Marlins ought to feel at home because nobody ever shows up anyways. But I'm taking a shot at them, and I love the Marlins. Don't get me wrong, but the Rays, they don't play in front of anybody anyways at St. Petersburg, really. But no, all kidding aside, yeah, I agree. You have to have a playing field which is unilateral for sure, Jody.
Well, I was actually at the Met National game today, Section 128, row 15.
I saw that photo.
At least that's my cardboard cutout is.
Hey, you got a cutout up, Stu? Good for you.
Yeah. So, I was able to make it back down here to South Florida in time for the show.
Hey, Jody, I don't have a problem taking a shot at the Tampa Bay Rays because Tropicana Field's in a horrible area. The Miami Marlins, to their credit, they got a beautiful stadium and probably right near the Orange Bowl, and they should have built that stadium somewhere else except where they're at. But other than that, Marlins Park is absolutely gorgeous, and I love going there. And I'll tell you, the Marlins have treated me well, so nothing against the organization per se, just the wrong location for it. But Tropicana Field, I don't care.
It's the same exact thing over across the state. It's in the hinterlands. You got to drive. There's no real place to park. It just is a terrible location. Now, they built a bad stadium. You're right. The Trop is a dump. But they have their occupational safety might not be the biggest problem, but just getting there is such a pain in the rear end.
Oh, yeah.
That contributes every year to the attendance for the Rays being god-awful. Those two teams do run in major contrast because up until this year, and we've already talked about the Marlins have done a nice job in this very shortened season for a shortened number of games, but they played real well. Tampa, with no revenue whatsoever and paying their players less than anybody else in Major League Baseball, is a 90-win team year in and year out. They get the baseball aspect of it very well. The Marlins did build themselves a very good stadium, and I hope they get a chance to take advantage of it somewhere down the road and actually play in front of a decent amount of fans with a good team.
Well, the only way Tampa stays relevant is you have to build that stadium in Hillsborough County. I used to live up in the Tampa Bay area. I have a degree in communication up in at the University of South Florida, and I have deep baseball ties to the Tampa area, as I do here, but more so in the Tampa area. So it's either Hillsborough County or nowhere for the Tampa Bay area, because you're right. They've got the baseball side of it really down with their player development. They make a lot out of nothing. To be able to win in Tampa Bay like Joe Madden did, and now Kevin Cash has done a super job there. I think the Marlins can win in Miami, and we all know that area can hold 70,000 people because you had the Orange Bowl. But I think the Marlins' problems have stemmed with 2 fire sales, 2 championships. And if you can see a consistent product, maybe they got a puncher's chance down there.
And I know they've been pushing for it for years. You might know the whole Tampa situation better than I do, being down there in Florida.
Yeah.
There have been people that have fought for the stadium in Hillsborough County, as you've suggested, but roadblocks always pop up. It doesn't get the political push that it needs to. Voters won't vote what needs to be put in place for them to build this stadium. I would say that the Rays have, on the local front and the political front, pushed as best as they could to get a stadium done, and it just looks like it's not going to happen.
Well, many years ago, here's a little bit of background on it. St. Petersburg built that stadium anyways, and for a lot of years it sat dormant now. And Tampa wanted a stadium right adjacent to where Tampa Stadium was, right? That's where they had all their stadiums there. Well, it got to the point where they weren't getting anywhere. You really want MLB bad enough? Take them. Well, now we know how it's worked out long term. I get that. So it's not a heck. Well, we don't need it. So that's the story. But now so the only thing I can say, and I know I may be getting a little off subject here down the line, but since we have you on here, Jody, could you see the Tampa Bay Rays eventually moving to Montreal and being the Montreal Expos, and then moving to the American League, where you have a natural rivalry between the Blue Jays and the Expos?
I'm a non-believer of the desire to get another Major League Baseball team back into Canada, specifically into Montreal. I don't know enough about the other teams. But there's a reason the Expos left, because they didn't support the team well enough. The Expos were competitors year in and year out, had teams good enough to make the postseason, and they still couldn't draw flies. I'm not as big a proponent of putting a team back into Montreal. Now, what other teams are there? They always talk about Carolina, the Charlotte area.
Right.
They've got other professional franchises there. Portland wants NHL team, and they were ticked off that they went back to Seattle before coming to Portland. We know who the other Vegas could get a major league team. We know the towns that are here in this country that you could make an argument for would support a major league baseball team. I would. The three that I mentioned, Carolina, Vegas, and Portland, would all be choices for me before going back to Montreal.
Well, I'd probably go ahead and put Nashville in the mix, and Dave Dombrowski spearheading an effort over there as well. So I think one of the things that hurt baseball in Montreal, though, was a 94 strike. Ernie Harwell, I'm sure you've heard of him, was like an uncle and a really close mentor of mine. And Ernie always told me that Montreal got hammered because of the 94 strike killed it. Then they had all those great players, and the rest is history. So, but do they get another chance? I don't know. It depends if they get a suitable baseball stadium. But I was just curious to get your opinion on that. So go ahead, Stuart. Keep going, buddy.
Okay, so with the abbreviated season, are any managers in danger of losing their job, or does everybody get a pass?
In season, no. No organization would be nasty enough to fire a manager in the middle of this 60-game season. But they will be handled exactly the same at the end of the season as if it were 162 games, would be my guess. If I were an owner, that's the way I would look at it. While there is no in-season firing, there's also no carryover from, well, yeah, but they could have been affected by the coronavirus and the short season. If they had played 160, I think the result would have been different. No, I don't believe that. I believe that all managers will be held to the usual accomplishment standard that they need to retain their jobs. I just don't think you'll see any action in season.
Yeah, now, the only thing where I might differ there is if you have a manager on an expiring contract, do they bring him back? I know that that's such the case up in Detroit where Ron Gardenhire is on the final year of his 3-year deal. Then you kind of wonder, do you bring in a new voice? But other than that, yeah, I'm with you there, Jody.
Right. Well, I think Stu's question was, does anybody get fired or at least I interpreted his question to be, does anybody get fired in season?
Right.
No, I don't think anybody gets fired in season. But once the season ends with expanded playoffs, let's remember that. So there might be a manager or two that could actually save his job because he makes the postseason in a year that he wouldn't have made the postseason otherwise if they didn't have expanded playoffs. Yeah, anybody can lose their job at the end of the season. I just think no one loses their job in season.
That's an excellent point. Okay, that's fair.
So now, Jody, who are your picks to make it to the World Series based on what you've seen so far this year?
Well, I'll tell you this right off the bat. Nothing that I've seen, no team that I didn't think could make a deep playoff run has done enough for me to say, wow, they just handled this so much better than anybody else. I underestimated them, and this plays to their strength. There's no team that falls into that category for me. I thought the Yankees were the team to beat the American League, and I thought one of their main competitors was going to be the Oakland A's. And they have the two best records in the American Leagues. And if you had heard my shows back in August back in July when they got this thing underway, you would know that I'm telling the truth here. Those were two teams I specifically mentioned in the American League, and damn if they're not the two best teams. I still think the Dodgers are the team to beat in the National League. I just think they're better than everybody else. Bellinger hasn't even started to hit yet. Seager just hit a home run again tonight. He's off to a great start and is an MVP candidate. I am a little surprised by the Cubs. They're off to a good start. I was on the Cubs bandwagon throughout Joe Maddon's tenure there because I'm as big a fan of his managerial capabilities as any manager in baseball. I kind of took a show-me attitude with David Ross, and he's showing me pretty darn well. The Braves took a big hit when Soroka went down. Their starting pitching isn't as good as I thought it was going to be. Well, Everett was a major disappointment. They sent him out. I'm a Newcomb guy, and he has not pitched well so far. So I think the National League East is kind of up for grabs, and I don't love anybody in the Central. And the Rockies are off to a phenomenal start, but push comes to shove. Dodgers starting pitching against Rockies starting pitching, I'm going to take the Dodgers in a key postseason series. So it's basically the same three teams I thought before the season got underway. Yankees and A's in the AL, Dodgers in the NL.
Yeah, unfortunately for the Yankees, obviously we know that Giancarlo Stanton's going to miss a little bit of time too, but I think they still...
No, Giancarlo Stanton's hurt? That never happens.
The Iron Horse? The Iron Horse?
Yeah, right. Not. Hey, you know what? Any other team would really deal with that with Stanton getting hurt, but they've got enough horses on that team where I'm still with you, Jody and Stu.
They brought in Clint Frazier, and he had 3 hits in his first game, including a home run.
Hey, I'm a big DJ LeMahieu guy, though. I wrote a story on him a few years ago out in for the Cactus League, and DJ LeMahieu to me is just a dynamo. He really is. So that's worth a vote for him for no other reason. But I still with you.
Yeah.
The Oakland A's, though, I'm with you, Jody. They're a team that could scare the daylights out of you. How they find a way to win with the Moneyball concept and Bob Melvin always being a candidate for Manager of the Year, they work wonders out in Oakland. All they need to do is get a stadium to match how good that team really can be and the type of baseball you get in Oakland. So.
Yeah, see, that's the good news. That's another reason why there were a couple that I thought the A's could certainly compete and beat the Astros in that division, one of which was it's advantageous for them that the games are being played in front of no fans because they are one of those teams that have no fans. And they don't lose out on the home field backing like other teams do. And the stadium doesn't look near as bad on television as it does if you actually had to walk into it and go into one of the 50-year-old bathrooms and the like. So they're actually making the most of not having fans in the stands. And I think they'll continue to do so all year.
I've actually been to that stadium when I covered the Lions and the Raiders, so I know exactly where you're coming from, Jody, for sure.
So before we wrap up, I just, Jody, you grew up in a baseball home. Your dad, worked for a number of major league teams. So he was in the unfortunate position of being the general manager when the Mets traded Tom Seaver. Did you have a say? I thought I remember you once saying that you suggested a player that they could get back for him in that deal. Yeah. I've only been telling this story. When was that? 1977, right? So yep.
How many years are we looking at now? I've been telling this story for 40-something years. Yes, my father was told, he was ordered by the powers that be, his bosses, M. Donald Grant, who was the president of the Mets at the time, and the DeRolays, who were Joan Payton's daughters, who inherited the team when she passed away, that they wanted Tom Seaver out of town, that Tom Seaver was negotiating his contract through the media, and that had never been done before. Now it's done by every player every year on almost every team, that agents are involved and they have media allies, and it just was a different time back in 1977. And I was a huge Met fan, and my father would come home and we'd discuss the team at night as we watched Met games on the road. If it was a home game, he was at the stadium till after the game was played. He'd go on some road trips, but not everyone, so I'd get a chance to actually sit and watch his team with him as they were playing at nights, and he would keep me informed as to what was going on. I wasn't allowed to say anything, and he trusted me and had confidence that I kept what he told me under wraps, which I did. But now, 40-some-odd years later, certainly can tell tales. He was told a week before the trade deadline, which in 1977, the trade deadline was June 15th, not August 31st. It was earlier in the season. They told him on about the 7th to the 8th of June, we want you to trade Tom Seaver. We're getting killed in the press. This is not right. This young man has the organization. We want you to make the best deal that you can. You got 7 days to do it, but before we get to June 15th, we expect you to make the best deal. We want you to say yes to the best deal that you come up with. Leverage all the teams in baseball, see if you can do the best you can, but we want you to pull the trigger on the trade. Don't come back and say, I just can't do it. That's not an acceptable answer. So my father got to work. and he was working on a deal with the Cincinnati Reds. And the first deal was going to be Steve Anderson, who was a young outfielder, prospect, AAA guy who had a lot of upside. Doug Flynn, who was a young infielder, who again had a lot of promise, a lot of upside. And Wally Eastwick, who was already in the big leagues and was proven to be one of the better closers. He wasn't the best closer in baseball, but a top 5, certainly top 10 closer of all teams in baseball. And he was going to be the third guy, and he was going to be a 3-for-1. Eastwick was coming up on a free agency at the end of the year. And my father said, I want a chance to talk to the player ahead of time because you can get a 42-hour window to see if you can negotiate a contract extension with the player. And my father requested the 48-hour window to talk to Wally Eastwick. So he got Eastwick and his agent on the phone, and the conversation lasted all of about 10 minutes. Wally Eastwick said, I'm not coming to the sewer that is New York City. He wanted no part of leaving Cincinnati and coming to New York. So my father said, okay, we don't want Wally Eastwick if he's that dead set against becoming a Met. We got no chance to re-sign him afterwards, so we got to go back to the drawing board. So the Mets put Pat Zachary in the deal rather than Wally Eastwick. And Zachary was a middling starting pitcher, not as good a overall player as Wally Eastwick was. And my father said, well, he said, you got to add a fourth guy. It's got to be a 4-for-1 because Eastwick is just better than Zachary. I'll take Zachary, but you got to give me a fourth guy. So they were going to get Bob Baylor, who was a grizzled veteran, part-time player, pretty good stick coming off the bench, heavy set first baseman, could only play first base. And that was going to be the fourth guy. My father came back and told me, and I said, Dad, if you're going to trade Tom Seaver and you're just trying to get the fourth guy in the team, fourth guy in the deal to be better, it's better to take another young guy. Chances are this is going to look like a terrible trade. You're going to get killed for it anyway. So you might as well go with upside. You don't need a 30-some-odd-year-old pinch hitter. The Mets weren't all that good anyway. I said, it's not going to improve you by 10 games. So I went through all of the scouting reports, and the best young player that they had was a guy by the name of Dan Norman. Now, he too was an outfielder, and they were already getting Steve Anderson in the trade. So when my father went back and said, well, we need Dan Norman as a fourth player, forget Bob Baylor, originally their general manager said, no deal. I'm going to be my best outfield prospect against. I'm not giving you both. So my father said, all right, if you say no deal, then it's no deal. And he hung up on Bobsman, the general manager of the Reds, and he sat on it for 48 hours. And they got to the 15th. And my father was like on pins and needles in his office, and Bob Hausman called him back and said, fine, I'll give you both Norman and Henderson, and the deal was made. Now, if Dan Norman turned into a Hall of Fame outfielder, I think I would have become the next general manager of the Mets.
Yeah, I was thinking
they would have just passed the job on from my father to me. But Dan Norman couldn't hit a curveball to save his life and had a cup of coffee career in the major leagues. And eventually my father moved on, and I moved back into being just a fan and never influencing again.
Okay, interesting story.
Huh. Yeah, definitely. Do you have anything else, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, do you have a good Billy Martin story?
Yeah, how do you know that?
Oh, I
kind of tipped him off.
Yeah, come on. I had a crystal ball, otherwise known as Mr. Hackett. Come on, man. Give me a
story I've shared on the air a couple of times. My father was actually pretty good friends with Billy.
Oh, was he?
And they got along pretty well. And the year that one of the times that Billy got fired from the Yankees, my father was flying into, I think it was the West Coast. It had to be the Bay Area with the Mets, and Billy Martin was leaving town after the Yankees had just played Oakland, which is where Billy had ended up. And he invited, Billy was already with the A's. Billy was the manager of the A's, so they were flying out of town. He'd already gotten bounced from the Yankees. My father knew when they were going to New York. My father was coming in with the Mets, and he runs into him in the airport. And he said, hey, Joe McDonald, how the hell are you? come on, let's you and I get a drink. And he just starts to walk to the bar closest to them in the airport. And my father says, no, Billy, I'll have a drink with you, but you come with me. And he's got one of those courtesy cards that you can go into a private room and have a drink behind closed doors rather than in an open bar, because Billy had had issues in open bars and punched out reporters and stuff like that. So my father went into the bar and had a drink, and Billy said, Joe, if you come to the A's right now, you leave the Mets, I will get you the general manager job with the Oakland A's, because he was the manager and general manager. He said, I'll resign as the general manager. I'll tell them they have to hire Joe McDonald. You and I will run the A's together, and we'll win championships together. And my father thought about it. He really did consider it. And he said, no, Billy, I think I'll pass. And he ended up doing the exact same thing with the St. Louis Cardinals the next year. Whitey Herzog was both the manager and the general manager. And he said, Joe, come out for a year. We'll give you some fancy title. The old man isn't going to want, the old man being Augustus Busch, who was in his 80s at the time, the owner of the Cardinals, won't let me just walk away from general manager. I got to get you out here, get you in the building first, and then I'll go into his office and say, I'm resigning as the general manager. And that's exactly what they did. And the first year my father was the general manager of the Cardinals. His second year there, they won a championship. So they made it work. But, Billy Martin tried to procure my father from the Mets before the Cardinals did.
Well, let me get into a few Billy Martin stories of my own now that we brought it up. First of all, I remember I had a chance to interview Billy Martin during spring training in Fort Lauderdale Stadium. I got to tell you, maybe I caught him on a good day. It was really nice to me, and Billy and I got along really well. Ironically, when he was with the Oakland A's, who would have thought that when the Oakland A's were they considered selling it to Marvin Davis and Denver Oil Men, only for that to be, I don't think the commissioner allowed that one to go through, that Billy Martin would ever work with Charlie Finley, two adversaries that they were with the Tigers and the Oakland A's. In the end, I've always credited Billy for saving baseball in Oakland, and most people don't realize it because that's his hometown. So a lot of people don't realize that. But here's another big irony. The day that Billy Martin was killed on December 25th, I think it was 1989, I was up in the New England area and tore my ankle on Magic Mountain on my last run of the day skiing. Now, why do I bring that up? Because anytime I think of Billy Martin's death, I think about my skiing accident. So if I ever need to look up my medical records, I just Google up Billy Martin, and that's when I found myself in a fiberglass cast for the better part of 16 weeks. Oh, that was painful. But my memories with Billy were good in spring training. He treated me pretty good, and his passing, and I feel he did save Major League Baseball in the Oakland area. So, for all the drama that Billy had with George Steinbrenner, I think that his legacy, forget about the marshmallow salesman and a few of the other things he had to deal with. I think baseball needs characters like Billy Martin. They really do, and I think they miss him. I thought Ozzie Guillen was probably the closest thing to him, but a different style. But, it's always good to share some Billy Martin stories, and I figured that since, we've done our homework here, that we got 4 for the price of 1, didn't we, Stu?
Yeah, we did. We did.
So any closing thoughts, Jody, about, we'll talk about the Marlins and the Cardinals. Again, I think the Marlins are still a good story, and the Cardinals, to me, I guess the only question is do they have a Rocky? Will they be standing toward the end?
Right. Can they play whatever that minimum number is? All 3 of us have decided tonight we don't know what that number is.
Right.
But whatever it is, can they get that? Can they get to that number and realistically finish the season? Or are they just going to basically compete with 29 teams? That's the only major issue today. Now, who knows what's going to happen next week or the week after that? And trying to predict or project what's going to happen with the coronavirus, I think, is just ludicrous. And I'll tell you what I think will happen, but I'm going to tell you, don't hold me to it, because no one can know exactly what they're doing. And baseball's doing a real good job of handling it on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, doing everything that they can to keep their players safe, but also get enough of a season in to make it legitimate. I think they're going to pull it off. I think it will get done. I think they'll find a way to do it, and then we'll all have fun when the season's over and done with, depending on how realistic, how was it, how much do you give credit to the teams and the players individually. But I do believe they'll find a way to pull it off.
Well, I wrote baseball off on August 9th, so I'm wrong there. And when we talk about how the pandemic has affected your radio shows, I know it's definitely forced me to dig deep into my bag of tricks to be able to put together a quality broadcast. Because this is when we find out what we're made of, right, Jody? Is where our creativity and our resources are, pandemic or not, because it's our responsibility to make sure that the people that listen to us are entertained and informed the best we can. So I don't know about you, but I'm thriving this as a really big-time challenge. I really am, how the pandemic is. I mean, it's one thing when things are going well and everybody's talking about games, but when how do you make the same old material look interesting? Well, you have to dig deep into your bag of tricks for sure. So I respect everything that you had to deal with. So I'm delighted that we've had you on the broadcast. With that said, this is a part of the broadcast where Jody McDonald lead off and let everybody know how everybody can get a hold of you. And I tell you, it's been an absolute pleasure having you and Stuart on tonight. So I'm really delighted to share airtime with you tonight, Jody. So let everybody know how they can get a hold of you.
Was a ton of fun for me. I enjoyed doing it. And yeah, it's a challenge for us, but it's a challenge for the players. And they're out there playing, so we have to accept the challenge just like them. I do for CBS Sports Radio, National Network. I'm on Saturdays and Sundays, evenings, nights. For Philly listeners, I'm on WIP Monday and Tuesday nights. WFAN, I do some fill-ins on the weekends for them. And you can always follow me and find me on Twitter at Jody McMahon, JodyMacMahon. Guys, it was my pleasure.
Well, I'll follow you if you follow me back. How does that sound, Jody? Is that all right? That way we can always definitely stay in touch. And Stuart, why don't you let everybody know how they get a hold of you before you go off, Jody? I'll make sure that we have all of our information exchange here. So go ahead, Stu. You're next.
Okay, so I haven't opted out of the tax business, despite contrary to popular belief. I am with Hack Tax and Accounting Services, managing member. I'm in Wellington, Florida. I could be reached 214-6171. That's a 561 area code, or on the web, hacktaxandaccounting.com. Twitter, HackTax1. Of course, Facebook page, Hack Tax and Accounting.
And as from you're listening to 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morganroth of Motor City Madmouth, joined by Jody McDonald and Stuart Hack tonight. This broadcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts. I've been accused of talking fast before, so I'll say it again. Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. In terms of my Twitter information, you can find me at Tribune South. Facebook, South Florida Tribune Gets It Done. Instagram, South Florida Tribune. I have a YouTube channel, South Florida Tribune. Our website is www.southfloridatribune.com. It's an online publication that gives you an awful lot. We have a lot of media distribution partners or columnists there. You can email me at southfloridatribune@gmail.com and connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Scott Morganroth. I'll be more than happy to connect you. So on behalf of Jody McDonald and Stuart Hack, my name is Scott Morganroth, wishing you a great evening. And everybody out there, please be safe. Take COVID-19 seriously, because this is too dangerous otherwise. Thanks for joining us here on 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. Good night, everybody.